to start with one which I think is a really good topic just in general, because this one directly relates to oxalate very clearly. And that's actually a very simple thing that we can work with, which is baking soda. Now, how would baking soda relate to oxalate? The interesting thing here is oxalate gets moved on 3 different kinds of cell transporters in the body. One of them is sulfate. That's why we can have liver issues. That's why the liver may be kind of sluggish. It's not because you need a detox. Lord help those people who are putting other humans on all these crazy detox things for the liver. What's happening is the liver may have oxalate on board because of these sulfate transporters. So a transporter that can move oxalate but also moves another nutrient, and that's true for all of the cell transporters that I know of that actually handle oxalate. What can then happen is you can end up with kind of a deficit position with the nutrient and too much oxalate on board. How that actually happens is, let's say your average liver cell is trying to run a sulfate process, and so it puts out a little cell transporter that takes energy on the cell's part, and it puts it out into the surrounding area to try and capture a sulfate molecule to do this work that it wants to do. This nice little cell transporter, I'm using my hand as an example, has an ending in here that's going to be appropriate to sulfate, so it can pick it up. That ending is also appropriate to oxalate. If you have lots of oxalate in the environment around that nice little liver cell, it might accidentally pick up oxalate instead of picking up sulfate. Pull it into the cell. The cell then realizes, however cells figure this stuff out, but there's some kind of intelligence down at that level where they don't have the nutrient that they need. They've kind of got an imposter. They've got this oxalate thing fit the cell transporter, but it's not going to fit the biochemical pathway. What does the cell then do? The cell has to put energy out to make this cell transporter be able to do its work. It's not going to exert energy at that point to get rid of the oxalate. It's going to go out again in pursuit of the sulfate that it needed. This is how oxalate can inadvertently get stranded essentially in the cell. And until the cell has enough energy, has cleared out enough of its backlog of work, has capacity in one way or the other, it's not going to push that oxalate out. This is why you get dumps. Let's say you've got 5 or 6 oxalate molecules inside this cell. The cell goes, okay, I've been able to do all my work. I've got enough energy. And then it pitches them all out at once. That's where we get into problems with oxalate, because you have this secretion of oxalate that happens kind of all at one time when the cell has enough capacity to do it. It is important for us to understand that oxalate's secreted as well. So it's not one of these really simple processes where it can just move out through the cell wall, or this is not how it takes work. So it happens like that with sulfate. Interestingly enough, bicarbonate cell transporters can do the same thing. They can move both bicarbonate and they can move oxalate. Ideally, you're moving bicarbonate into the cell and oxalate out of the cell. But as I just explained, you might be getting an accumulation of oxalate molecules inside the cell because in a case of mistaken identity, that cell transporter's moved oxalate in. So this is one of those situations where if we can provide some nutrient to a cell that it may be lacking, that may give it the capacity to be able to get rid of some oxalate. So we want to handle this a little bit carefully because we don't want to overdo it. We don't necessarily want to provide a ton of sulfate all at once, and then the liver tries to do too much work. Similarly, we don't want to add too much bicarbonate all at once, and then the big consumers of bicarbonate in the body try to do too much work all at once. You have some interesting consumers of bicarbonate. One of them is the pancreas. So most of us have some level of issue with digestion, and we can really be challenged both because the pancreas is having some trouble with secreting enough digestive enzymes, in part because it doesn't have enough bicarbonate, because part of the digestive enzymes work is to bring up the pH of the food in the stomach before it hits the intestines. So our pancreas can be really kind of working hard. And of course, our liver can be working hard, and it's the source of bile for fat digestion. So we can have kind of a 3-ring circus going on in our digestive tracts. That being said, if we're going to focus mostly on bicarbonate and baking soda and this simple way that we can support ourselves, it turns out that baking soda has a number of functions, not just supporting the pancreas, although that's a good one. We should keep that one in mind, but also other ones which are supported by research and which may be very interesting as gentle things that we can do in these particular areas. So turns out that baking soda, simple ordinary baking soda, and you can use any bicarb if you have other forms of bicarb, like a potassium bicarb or a magnesium bicarb, that's going to be a possibility. So if you wanted to do something a little more nuanced than just sodium bicarbonate, you can. But if you're taking in bicarbonate and they use plain baking soda in the research, it turns out that it can reduce inflammation in the body. And in fact, they found that it could reduce inflammation in the spleen, which is one of those areas in the body where medicine doesn't necessarily know what to do for inflammation there. So that was a very interesting result. And that particular study, I'll have to look for the link because I'd like to put it in the notes, but they were using a relatively small dose, but still big by my standards. So they were using 1.5 teaspoons of baking soda over the course of the day. So half a teaspoon, half a teaspoon, half a teaspoon. What I would say to you is I would never start that high. I would probably start with a smaller amount, like 1/8 of a teaspoon, maybe. You might even want to go lower than that, especially if your own body's more fragile. And I would start at one time first. And I would normally do that in the morning, but between breakfast and lunch so that you're not affecting stomach acid. Okay. So you want to have it far enough away from food so that by the time you're going to eat again, your stomach acid is going to be there and ready to go. But you can take it up to 3 times a day. It can help with inflammation. It can also act as a mild antihistamine. So this is a really interesting thing for those of us who have histamine issues. You can take, again, small dose of bicarbonate and help to reduce some of your histamine symptoms. And from that standpoint, what I stumbled across was that it can help with sleep. So for some of us who are having problems with sleep, it can be related to our histamine levels being too high. And if that is true for you, a little bit of bicarbonate in water before bed may help you with sleep. And what I personally do, because I'm a bit of a histamine gal as well, is that I'll use probably 1/4 teaspoon of bicarbonate, not too much water, maybe 3 or 4 ounces. Might drink about half of that before I go to bed. And then if I'm having enough difficulties, sometimes I'll wake in the night and then I'll drink the rest of that. It's a great time to take this stuff as long as you handle it okay, because what you're getting there is an opportunity to take it when you're not going to be digesting food. So you're not going to negatively affect your stomach acid. Should be fairly simple for you to take it at that time. And, for people who are having real difficulties with sleep and none of the other kinds of sleep remedies are helping, this might be one to try. I do go as high as half a teaspoon, but I wouldn't do that if your health is more fragile. I would start with a smaller dose and work your way up. So not only can it help in terms of being a mild antihistamine, not only does it reduce inflammation, not only can it help with sleep, but it can actually help in the lungs. We apparently do a fair amount with bicarbonate cell transporters in the lungs. And it's known that baking soda and water can help thin some of the secretions in the lungs. So if you're feeling like you're getting one of those chest congested kind of colds, this may be helpful. For people who get allergies where they get chest congestion, this could be helpful. And again, a very simple remedy to deal with. It's not something you have to pay a lot of money for, and gentle. It's working with the nutrients that your body needs anyway. Just as an aside, for those of us who are dealing with oxalate, because oxalate's an acid, we can have the kidneys working a bit harder. We can also have some, challenges kind of with pH management overall. So we may find that we're waking up in the morning and our urine is really acidic because the kidneys are really having to work to keep, our proper pH balance in the body. So a little bit of bicarbonate may also support the kidneys because it gives you some pH resources, which are alkalizing, and that may actually be a supportive for that aspect of the oxalate journey. So baking soda can be doing a lot of things for us. For some people, this may be the way that we actually can support ourselves even better than with sulfate. It's a bit of an experiment. So some people will do fine with things like Epsom salts, which is providing sulfate to the body. And some people will find that's too much for them. Some people may do better with chloride. It turns out that chloride cell transporters also move oxalate. So that may mean things like magnesium flakes, which are actually magnesium chloride, may be a very good option. And we can also use baking soda or bicarbonate as things like a foot soak or a bath, because again, we can get this sort of low dose all over the body that can be supportive. So we've got all kinds of ways that we can make use of baking soda, but the simplest way might be a small dose in a glass of water. Just make sure you're taking it away from food so that you're not affecting your stomach acid. Start always first in the early part of the day, but if you feel really relaxed and like it's going to support sleep, then you can move a dose to the evening as well. So that's the joys of baking soda kind of in a nutshell. And so we can always talk a little bit more about this, but I wanted to make sure that people had some of these really nice, simple, gentle tools that are available and may do a lot more for us than we think. With that said, I actually find that I need more of things like baking soda when I'm under stress. I do think there is some relationship between stress and oxalate, and it may be as simple as our body when we're under stress is not working out of our healthy homeostasis, but more out of what I've heard people call allostasis, which is this stress pathways. And when we're stressed, we're also using up nutrients potentially faster and maybe in a different way than we would if our body's handling its work with some ease. So it may actually mean both that we might not dump, so stress might hold off dumping in some ways, but it also may mean that we might produce a bit more oxalate metabolically than we would normally, which may also be a reason for why when stress is over, we might have more oxalate dumping because there's just a little bit more oxalate on board too. So I am still looking at the research here to see what, I can find in terms of what the connection is here. But I would say in general, because oxalate drives inflammation, because stress can drive inflammation, there may be a way where these things get tangled up together. We don't have a ton of research on that at this point, but I'm probably going to spend some time in the kidney stone research to see if I can find something which gives us some ideas about how we best support ourselves when under stress. But I am going to say one of the things that we don't do enough of is manage our nervous system. So I'll just throw that in as a throwaway comment right now. We might get a chance to talk a little bit more of that later in the meeting.